I think I needed something creative. As I said before, the business was kind of rote.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing the same thing all the time. Nothing I did seemed to make a difference in the sense that it didn't make our sales increase, but it didn't make our sales decrease. I just felt like I could roll along here until I fall into my grave. Nothing would change.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was after some stimulus, I think, of something. And I thought a creative outlet would be good.
Yeah.
Even if it wasn't something I was thinking of as a career.
Hello, you are listening to the Late Bloomer Living podcast, where we are reimagining and redefining what it means to be in midlife, where we are gathering energy, momentum, and excitement for our next chapter via candid conversations with other midlifers about their own pivots, pitfalls, and triumphs. I'm Yvonne Marchese, your host, and I'm so happy you're here. Do you think of yourself as being a creative type? So many people that I know and meet and come across tell me they aren't creative. And I just have to question that every time somebody tells me that. Because I thoroughly, in my bones, believe that we are all creative. I think it looks different for different people. And sometimes I think we can surprise ourselves and discover creativity in ourselves that we didn't recognize before. It happened to me when I turned 40 and decided to learn to become a photographer. I had been an actress, so yeah, I guess I thought of myself as creative in a way, but I didn't know if photography was something I could do. I had been trying to take good pictures of my kids and of flowers and things like that with my point and shoot camera, and I'm telling you now, there was really no indication based on the results I had that I had the potential to be a photographer. But once I decided I wanted to learn how, and I wanted to do it as a career, it really did come as an overnight aha moment. It was very strange. And I am so thankful that I took that chance. So this week's guest is Maggie Smith, not the Maggie Smith from the movies, from, the London dame Maggie Smith. We're not talking about her. We're talking about Maggie Smith, the writer. And she was not always a writer. In fact, she has just recently had her debut novel in Midlife. She had a career as a businesswoman. And I'm going to let you hear the rest from her, because I just think it's a fascinating story. And by the way, the book that just got published of hers is called Truth and Other Lies, and it is darn good, and I think you should go get it. I'm just going to say that. So, yeah, without further ado, here's Maggie Smith. Hey, Maggie, thank you so much for being with me today.
I'm delighted to be here. I've been listening to your podcast, and it's fascinating. I'm glad to be a guest on it.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I was, so I have been aware of you, of your presence in the world, doing what you're doing with your podcast and through Instagram, because Jill Hannah Anderson was one of my early guests. And I think I noticed that you got, just looking at Instagram, I noticed you and you just looked interesting to me. So it's funny that then when I heard from your publicist through Dana Kay, who I also happen to know, I was like, wait a minute, I know who Maggie Smith is.
And not the one in England.
Right, and not the one in England. And so I was really excited to talk to you because you have just written and published your first novel, right?
It's publishing in a couple of weeks. Well, when we're doing this interview, it'll be published afterwards when you get this on the air. So
Yeah,
yeah, it's exciting time. I'm
yeah,
trying
man,
to
oh
enjoy
man.
it, every minute of it.
I bet, I bet. So let's go back a little bit because I mean this is happening later in life for you. You've had an entire career, or I think multiple careers, right?
Right,
But you
right.
had your own business. So if you don't mind, like just kind of catch us up. And I'd like to know, I guess my pressing question is, did you always want to write a novel? And if you did, like what kept you from doing it? Or is this something that kind of happened later on and you thought, let me try this out? So anyway, I'll let you back up a little bit and give
Well,
us a little history of your own.
all right. So many writers say, "Oh, yes, I always knew I was a writer." I'm not that person. I was interested in writing, interested in reading and English and literature. And when I was in high school, I was the editor of the school paper. So I was more in the journalist road. I went to Northwestern to their Medill School when I first started college from Oklahoma. I lived in Oklahoma, so that was a big deal to go to a big city to the prestigious university. So I was really much more interested in the journalistic writing. And then I dropped that and segued into psychology and wound up getting a PhD in psychology and being a psychologist for a few years. So I think
Wow.
back and uh, I think my parents, when I was growing up, I was the firstborn, and I think they said, "You can be anything you want." And what I heard was I could be everything I want. So I kept, oh, I'd like to be a journalist and a psychologist. And so then I got married and we moved to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so that was the precipitous to start a business. And we were young, we were in our late 20s. And my husband had been married before, so he had a couple of kids. We weren't going to have kids. And so we decided to start a business. So we started a business selling artwork in a couple of the malls here in town. And looking back, I don't think I thought I would do it forever. I think I just thought I would do it for now.
Yeah.
It's that sounds like fun. Artwork. I wasn't an artist. I wasn't a business person. I just thought,
Wow.
well, if we need to do it, we can get jobs as psychologists. He was a psychologist too. So we ran mall stores that sold posters and prints. But up in Wisconsin, that's a lot of wildlife prints, so a lot of ducks and deer and things like that.
Yeah.
And we did that for a while, and then when we got bored with that, I guess, we started a national company. So we started doing this nationally and shipping all over the country. And it grew to be like $4 million in sales. I mean, it was kind of
Wow.
growing like Topsy. And I had 18 people on staff. And my husband went back to being a psychologist, and I ran the business by myself. And he at one point said, "Do you think you could run this business by yourself? Because I'd like to be a psychologist." And I said, "Honey, I've been running this business for the last year. I don't know what you're doing here," kind of facetiously. But
That's
so
hilarious.
anyway, that was what I did before I became a writer, and I did it for a few decades. Um, and it I did have a time in which I had, to make a long story short, I had someone that used to work for me that poached a lot of my employees. And so I had this kind of mass exodus of people.
Yeah.
And it really threw me into a spin, and I had to downsize a lot.
Yeah.
So then it became less interesting. It wasn't as successful financially. I was doing the same thing year after year. I was getting a little bored.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I began looking into what else could I do. And I went to a writing seminar up north in Wisconsin and just kind of got the bug and started doing it. I was the boss, so I could close the door and do it during work hours
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Uh, and then a man came along who I had known. He had been a supplier of mine, and he offered to buy the business. And I thought, oh, that would be great. I'm a little young to retire, but I should probably take this opportunity and seize it because
Yeah.
timing is everything. So about 3.5 years ago, I sold the business to him. And
Wow.
then I began writing full time. And
Wow.
whether the money will last, I don't know. I may have to go back to work somewhere along the way, or write more books. But that's how I segued into it. And
That's
so I think
incredible.
when you're writing a debut novel, it's hard to write a novel. I've done a lot of things in my life, and writing a novel is probably the hardest thing I've ever done. And you're also learning how to write. Just writing a novel is hard, but you're learning how to write on your first one. So
Yeah.
you know nothing except if you've read a lot, you think you know stuff. But
Right. Think it,
turns out you don't.
oh my gosh. So you started off thinking you were going journalism. Then you went into psychology. I mean, you got your PhD. That's how old were you when you decided to go to get the PhD and
Oh,
go
I
that
went
route?
straight through.
Straight
I
through.
never stopped going to
Gotcha.
college.
So it was
So
like
I just,
just journalism, and then you flipped and said, "Oh,
right,
psychology, and let's go that
right,
route."
right.
And did you ever go into a practice of actually of doing psychology as a
Well,
practice?
the PhD program I was in had rotations, a little bit like a doctor did.
Yeah.
So I functioned as a psychologist, but more at the master's level while I was working on the PhD. So I did
Gotcha.
that for a couple of years, and then I was working on my dissertation. So one of the places I had worked hired me as a master's level psychologist. So
Gotcha.
I was probably doing it for about 4 years before I got the PhD.
Wow.
So
I'm just
enough to
fascinated
know I
that you
probably wasn't any good at it.
I'm fascinated that it just flipped into this business around artwork and everything. I mean, that's just amazing. It like and it was it your husband's idea? Was it your idea? Did you guys kind of think of this together?
Well, I think we wanted to start a business, so it wasn't necessarily artwork. We just said, let's start a business together. That would be fun.
Okay.
Well, you're 26. What do you
It's
know
just like throw
about?
it yeah.
Yeah. And we actually wanted to start a bookstore because we were big readers. So what do you want? I want to start a business. Well, how about a bookstore? And at that time, Barnes and Noble and Borders and all that was in all the malls. And
Mm,
I thought, yeah, that seems like pretty stiff competition to me.
yeah.
So at that time, there weren't art stores in malls as much. They were just starting to be a concept. And so we had seen that concept in Oklahoma and thought, well, that might be kind of fun and seems like it'd be easy to get into. So we didn't know what we were doing.
I love it. You know what? There's something to
Luckily,
be said for that, though, right? Because
I
sometimes
guess
if you
so.
know too much, you stop yourself from doing it because it seems
Yes.
like too much. So there's a certain,
And,
certain.
and and we hooked up with a mall that really wanted us. So we ran out of money to do it, and they said, "Oh, we'll loan you some money." So I mean that's unheard of too. But
Wow.
I think they just really wanted to expand the kinds of things they had in the mall, and it was one of the top malls in Milwaukee. And so we said, I guess we're doing this. I can remember us shrugging our shoulders and saying, "I think we're doing this." So we did.
Did you enjoy? I mean, you eventually left the malls and started, your national business and selling artwork to hospitals and all kinds of
Right.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
Did you enjoy what you were doing? Was it something
I
that,
enjoyed the retailing because I enjoyed the customer interaction.
yeah,
But after a while, we had three stores. So it was a baby chain. And I couldn't be in the stores all the time. So I had to start hiring personnel, staff,
yeah,
because
yeah,
I couldn't man all three stores. And so then it became less fun because then I was doing accounting and running a manufacturing plant and, you know, that kind of thing as opposed to direct selling of the artwork.
yeah,
So the most fun was in the beginning when we were the ones, we had one store, we were the ones that were manning the counter, we were the ones meeting the customers. I think that was the most fun of it.
yeah,
After that, it became more of we're doing this and we're earning a living at it. So we have to keep doing it. This is how we're paying the bills.
yeah. When did you get the bug to write?
Well, I went to that workshop and the teacher gave us a prompt and she said, here's the sentence to fill in. I could never write a book about, and I put mothers and daughters, just about that quickly. And then I looked at
I'm
that
laughing
and thought,
because
because you've read my book.
yes.
And I thought, why did I put that? And it was because I had not had any children, and my mother and I did not have a close relationship. So I thought that would be hard to write because I don't have the experience. Some women call their mother every day. My mother and I were at loggerheads from the time I was able to talk, it seems like.
Yeah.
And so the teacher said, well, now you have to write for 15 minutes about that subject you could never write a book about.
Wow.
And I can remember, and I think I have around here somewhere, the page where I drew 3 circles, and I drew mother, daughter, mentor. And because I think I had always, because I didn't have a close relationship with my mother, I think through my college years at least, I was always looking for a mentor, a woman that was older that I could use as a role model, that I could pattern myself after. And I found that in some cases in the psychology track that I was on, I had some supervisors that were older, not older women, but maybe 20 years, 30 years older, where they could be my mother age. And so I thought, well, that's an interesting dynamic, a girl that's in her mid-20s that doesn't have a close relationship with her mother, but she's still looking for what a mother can give a daughter.
Yeah.
And where is she trying to find it? And so in essence, that forms some of the crux of what my book still is, even though at that time it was a totally different story. I rewrote the book probably at least 2 times where it was an entirely different story.
Wow.
At one point it was an adoption story. It had nothing to do with what it does now.
Wow.
And so the first developmental editor that I gave it to turned it back on the first page. She said, I could keep on editing this, but it would be like putting icing on a cake that isn't any good. And I thought, I guess I don't know what I'm doing.
Ouch. Oh my goodness. So,
but I went on.
So kudos to you. Seriously. It's hard enough to write a first book, but then to have to rewrite it more than once. Wow.
I used to have 3 points of view. I had all 3 of those, the mother, the daughter, and the mentor had a point of view. Now there's just one. The daughter is the point
right.
of view.
Yeah.
And that was from one developmental editor who says, you're taking on too much for a first novel. Just pick one and make that the point of view. And I think it might want to be the daughter because she has more at stake. And I thought, okay, I'll try that. And when I made that change and made the change into the plot, it really only took me about 3 months to write it because I was so familiar with the characters, even though they were in a different plot, it was fairly easy to write.
Oh my gosh. I hope some aspiring author is listening to this right now, because I can imagine that, you get to a point, and if somebody gives you that kind of feedback, it could easily stop you. And you were not stopped. How did you move through that?
Well, I had one friend who's a really good writer. She writes historical romance. And she said, she isn't criticizing you. It's just the book. You don't know how to write yet. Just give yourself permission to not know how to write yet and go learn how to write.
I love that.
And so I started going to good conferences, buying books. I have an entire bookshelf of craft books that I read, taking individual workshops. At that time, we could do it face-to-face a little bit more than we can now. But I still do that. I still sign up for classes, and I still feel like, and also I feel like you can learn a lot from the books on your own shelf. You can pull out Rebecca Mackay's The Great Believer, which I think is one of the great American novels.
Writing it down.
And you can learn how to write from the fact that she's written, and you can figure out what she did. So you have the best mentors right there on the shelf. And I do a lot of analyzing books. I have taken books where I actually counted how many pages were in each chapter, how many chapters they had, what happened in each chapter.
Mm-hmm.
As I study certain ways of structuring novels, like Save the Cat is one that people know a lot. There's an old book, Marathon Man, that he wrote long before Save the Cat. And when I read it, I thought, I think this exactly dovetails with the Save the Cat structure. And I went through and actually analyzed it like it was a term assignment. And sure enough, it was
Wow.
exactly the Save the Cat structure.
Oh my goodness. Wow. So you got this feedback and you managed to move through it. So I just want to, like, what made you decide to take the workshop in the first place? Like, what was that decision? Did it?
I'm not really sure. I think part of it was just the place. I wanted to go away for a retreat. It was a week-long retreat in this wonderful wooded area called the Clearing that is in
Yeah.
upstate Wisconsin. So that had always attracted me. And of all the offerings, it's kind of like a folk school. So they have classes on painting and pottery and wood making, a lot of folk art things.
Yeah.
Um, and I thought, well, I can't really do any of that. I don't know how to paint or woodwork or pottery. I mean, I guess it would be you go to learn. But I thought writing, I know a little bit about that. I used to do that as a journalist. I could probably do that. So that's, I think, nothing more serious than that. Nothing like, why don't I pick another career?
Right.
It
Just
was
like
just,
following your interests and going,
yeah,
you knew you needed a retreat, it sounds like,
right.
right? So let me ask you another question. What was it that you needed the retreat from? What was going on for you that you felt like you needed to step back?
Well, I think I needed something creative. As I said before, the business was kind of rote.
Mm-hmm.
I was doing the same thing all the time. Nothing I did seemed to make a difference in the sense that it didn't make our sales increase, but it didn't make our sales decrease. I just felt like I could roll along here until I fall into my grave. Nothing
Mm.
would change.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was after some stimulus, I think, of something. And
Yeah.
I thought a creative outlet would be good,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't something I was thinking of as a career.
Sure. Yeah. Did you have you always thought of yourself as creative, or have you not thought of yourself that way prior to
I
now?
don't think I've thought of myself as creative at all. I think I was always the brain. I think I
Mm-hmm.
was always the person that was the thinker, the planner. Um, and even now, I would say I'm very much of a plotter versus a pantser, which is two terms that writers use. The plotter is the one that knows where the story is going exactly, plans it all out. Well, the kind of person that would take Marathon Man and do a term paper on it.
Uh-huh.
Um, and a pantser is someone who just sits down and says, I have no idea what's going to happen. I'm just going to go by the seat of my pants. I could never do that. I would be
Pantser,
off
I get it, like by the seat of your pants.
by your seats of your
Now I'm getting it.
pants.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
hilarious. Oh my
yeah.
goodness.
So no, I have the chapters planned, and I give myself room to like, oh, it's not an adoption story, because I had written this whole book as the adoption story, and I went to a seminar given by a well-known workshop leader, Donald Moss. He's also an agent, and he read 50 pages of everybody's, I think. And when he had the one-on-one with me, he said, oh, I see you've written the secret baby story. Every woman seems to have a secret baby story she has to write and get out of her system. And I thought, this doesn't sound very positive.
No.
I think I should do something different.
Wow.
So I was getting feedback that that I wrote very well and that my characters were interesting. I just didn't have a very good plot. So I just needed to put them in a different story. And that's what I wound
Wow.
up doing. And I went back to my journalism degree. I mean, there is a strong theme of journalism in my
In the book.
story,
Yeah.
and my protagonist, who is 25, goes to Northwestern universities, or she graduated from their journalism school. So, I wonder where I got that from.
Right, right.
So there were some things that I drew on from when I was 25 and
Yeah.
remembering back.
Yeah. Wow.
I interviewed somebody on the podcast. I always, how certain people stick with you. And she had written a book from this point of view of a 10-year-old. And I said, was it hard to do that, to get into the mind of a 10-year-old? And she said, I still remember what it's like to be 10 years old, don't you? And I thought, yeah, I guess I kind of do, if
Yeah.
you thought about it long enough. And I was able to get back to what it was like to be 25.
Yeah.
Even though I'm not 25 anymore, I remember
Sometimes
what
I
it was
still
like.
feel like I'm 25 until I
And
until
sometimes you wish you were 25.
until I go to get up and I'm like, oh.
Yeah, I know what that's like.
So we've mentioned your podcast a couple of times, and it's terrific. And I would love to know how was that born? Like, what made you decide, I think I'll do a podcast?
Well, I started it, it'll be 3 years ago this May. And so podcasts weren't as popular then. They were just kind of, you were hearing about them. I think they really came into their own because of the pandemic. People sitting around saying, hey, I could do something from home. But at this time, that wasn't the case. And it had been in the Zeitgig. I'd been hearing about them, and I belonged to Women's Fiction Writers Association, WFWA. And at that point, they had about 500 members, and they were wanting to grow their association. They were looking for outreach programs. And I was just thinking one day, I'm the brain, and I thought, podcast, WFWA. So I went down to my husband and said, I think I've just come up with the absolutely most wonderful idea I ever came up with in my life. And I explained the podcast, and I said it would build my platform, my visibility as an author. It would help the authors that I put on the podcast. It would help the association in their outreach. Why would they not say no? I mean, why would they say no?
Right.
And so they didn't. They said, sounds like a great idea as long as you're volunteering to do this, because it's an all volunteer organization. And so I just started. I hired somebody to help me with equipment because I didn't know anything about equipment. And I had been on a podcast for Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers, which is a group I belong to. And so I called that guy and said, how do you get a podcast up? Is that even the right word, up? And so he explained where he housed his podcast and how it worked. And it really was only maybe a year ago that we went wide. Up until then, it was on my on my website and on WFWA, but it wasn't on Apple or Spotify or any of those places.
So did you go back? So this is just me geeking out on podcast stuff because I do. Did you go back then and fill in your back catalog of things that had not been on that? Oh, so interesting.
That just happened automatically when I signed up for it. They went back and swept up all
swept
the
it
other.
all in.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
And
good.
that happened because I redid my website. I, by that time, knew I was going to be publishing, and I hired a firm to redo my website. And he said, why aren't you like on all the other channels?
Yeah.
And I said, because I don't know how that works. And he said, well, we could do that for you. And I was like, yes, please. So suddenly I was on Apple and Google and iHeartRadio and all these other places, and you don't have to pay for it. They're looking for content.
Right.
So that was good again for the outreach for WFDA.
Yeah.
And now when I first started, I was having maybe the first 3 or 4 months, I was having to call people and say, would you like to be on the podcast?
Yeah.
Because you have to be a member of WFWA, and it's when you bring out your debut novel.
Mm-hmm.
And it has to be women's fiction because there are people that write romance and mysteries and stuff that are part of the association. The novel has to be women's fiction. So we're staying on brand. Yeah. And so I had to ask people to be on, and I was doing it twice a month. And then after a year, it got to be so popular that now I have 35 people on the waiting list. And now I do it once a week, but even then that's over half a year that it's booked out.
Yeah.
And
Wow.
so now it's like, oh my goodness, people are begging me to be on the podcast. So,
Oh my
which is
goodness.
great. It's like, I'll get to you, I
That's a
promise.
great problem to have. Oh my goodness. And so you were already working on your book when you started your podcast. So it's
Right,
you're so genius to have a podcast to help you with your branding and with your
right.
meeting people in the industry with I think you and I talked before we started recording about how you're learning from other people's path to publication because it's everybody's debut novel, right? So that's kind of
Exactly.
part of what you talk about on your
Yes.
podcast, right?
I'm getting a great education because I get to ask and they're all the way from people who indie publish, they self-publish their own things and
Mm-hmm.
why they did that and how that happened and what they had to go through to people with the big five. There are there are big name authors. Sarah Penner, who was a big seller with The Lost Apothecary last year or the year before. She was on Julie Clark, who's on her third novel now. So there's a whole range of people. A lot of people are with hybrids, or a lot of people with small presses. So I
Mm-hmm.
also got to learn all along the way, and that's also what I'm trying to do on the podcast is help my listeners learn what are some ways to get published if you can't get an agent. And
Yeah.
I think it helps a lot of the people, even when they do get an agent, they will say, I queried 75 people before I got my agent. So I think that's helpful for people to hear
Yes, so that they
that,
don't think that that it's never going to happen or that there's
right,
something wrong with them. I mean,
right,
there's limited shelf space. There's limited, you got
right,
gatekeepers to go through, right? That's
right,
always,
right.
yeah. Oh, so fascinating.
And
What?
since this is about late bloomers, a lot of times people, when they're older, they don't want to wait. They will
Mm-hmm.
say, to get an agent might take a year, and then for that agent to sell the book might be a year or year and a half. I didn't want to wait that long. That's what they'll say,
Yeah. Yeah.
because I'm older and I wanted to see my book out in the world. So, and
Yeah.
sometimes you hear, you do hear stories. I got an agent, they couldn't sell it. So just getting an agent is not the magic bullet either.
Mm. Mm. Wow. I have a friend whose mom is in her 80s and just wrote, and her first book is coming out now, part of a fantasy series. It's
Oh, that's so
freaking
fun.
amazing. And it's part of a series. I mean, she's got more than
Yeah.
one book written already. You know what I mean? It's just it's so
And
exciting to me to
fantasy
see
is
that.
kind of a young person's, usually that's younger people buying them. So it's
Yeah.
also interesting from that.
Yeah, it's really cool. Um, oh, I know what I wanted to ask you. So you did the workshop. At what point did you think, oh, there's a story here. Oh, I think I really want to write a book. When did that happen in the workshop or did it happen later?
Well, I kind of thought, I guess when I thought about writing, I never thought about let's write a short story or a poem, it just always seemed like, well, I'd have to write a novel. I guess because that's what I read. I read
Hmm.
novels. And I knew I could write essays and things like that because that was like term papers when you're in college. So I think I just began thinking that's a lot of words. How many words is a novel? I didn't even know. I knew how many pages it was, I guess. Um, no, I don't know. I just started planning out the planning out what would happen and who the characters would be. And then I just started writing it. I don't know. Nobody was waiting for it. That's the other
Right.
thing. When you're assigned author, your agent and your publisher are saying, well, in 1 year you have to give us another book. Nobody's waiting for your first book.
Right.
So you have to have the self-discipline to keep working on it
Yeah.
because if you don't write it, the world goes on.
Hmm. And if not now, when? Right?
Yeah. I just
Yeah.
thought that would be cool. Let's just, and I was having fun with it. So I didn't have a lot of big expectations. I don't think I was driven by let's get this written and sell it and then move on and build a career of this. I just thought it was a creative thing to do and I enjoyed doing it. So
Yeah.
I was just doing it and I wasn't doing it by a schedule. That came later when it was more formed and I was trying to revise it into something that actually might have legs that I could go out in the world with. But in
Yeah.
the beginning, I think it was just, this is kind of fun. Wonder how that works. What's a dialogue tag? How do I do description? And I would, and reading the craft books and taking the classes, you were forced to kind of write
Yeah.
some pages, and then you get good remarks from people and you think, oh, this is kind of fun. So,
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I love that you just let yourself explore.
yeah. So
Did have you always been somebody who have felt free to explore like that? That
I
sort of
guess so,
impulse?
since I kind of impulsively changed careers a lot. Um, I think I did get the message that I could probably do anything I wanted. I remember when I went to college, I grew up in not a small town in Oklahoma. I grew up in Tulsa,
Mm-hmm.
but Oklahoma is a little bit of a state where people stay there a lot. Maybe every state is like that. But I wanted to get out in the world, and I felt like that meant moving away from Oklahoma. And suddenly, when I got to Northwestern, it was a whole different scenario because everybody there was very accomplished, and everybody had been editor of their newspaper, and everybody
Mm,
had worked on the year. There were people that I recognized that were on TV. They were actors because they had an active acting school, and there were people I had watched on TV in my
wow.
dorm. So
Wow.
I went, oh, I am in the big time. But
Wow.
it was
Wow.
okay. It was exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So there you are. D- what have you learned about yourself going through just this massive sea change at this point in your life?
That's a good question. What have I learned about myself? Obviously, that I'm flexible, that I'm not, at this point in my life, I've learned that I'm not as concerned with making money. I think when I was in the business world, I was much more concerned with making money, saving money, being successful in the eyes of the world. And now little things make me happy, playing with the dog, taking a walk, being able to get up out of the chair, like you said. Gee, that made me happy. Reading a reader's review. I mean, reading a review from someone who's read my book that I don't know, that loved my book, you know,
Yeah.
that makes me happy. Um, so I think I've become more mellow, I guess, and not as anxious about stuff as I used to be when I was younger.
Do you think of
Maybe that
yourself
just
as
kind
creative now?
I think of myself as creative, yeah, yeah, but only in the writing realm. I'm not creative in, I mean, I dress in sweatpants every day, so I guess I'm not creative in fashion. Uh,
Me neither.
I also have gotten much more extroverted as I've gotten older, which I was not in high school and college extroverted at all.
Hmm.
I wouldn't say I was introverted. I think I was just very solitary.
Hmm.
Um, and as I've gotten older, I've gotten much more extroverted and interested in talking to people and life of the party kind of thing. So I
Yeah.
don't know
So
what
the
that change
podcast
is
is a
about.
good fit for
Maybe
you.
so.
I think it's terrific. I mean, because you have such a terrific niche. It's like you women writers debut novels, like, and the process of getting published. I mean, I can imagine that your listeners must be looking forward to every episode. Like, oh, what's next? Who's next? What can I learn next? And of course, they're all readers because they're writers, they're readers, right? So they're learning
Mhm.
about other people's work and it's a new thing to read. And what's not to love about that?
I come downstairs after the podcast every week and say to my husband, that was such an interesting person that I just talked to. And he said, you say that every week. But they are such interesting people. that
Yep.
they have such interesting stories. Well, you find that, I'm sure, on your
I
podcast too.
do. It's the best part of doing this is it's been amazing. I've never met so many people as I have in the year and a half since I've been doing this. And, I've made friends and it's crazy. Is there a book or movie or person that has been a big influence on you?
Well, my secret vice that I want to write is kind of mysteries. Agatha Christie was my first big crush as a writer. And I can remember reading and just reading everything all the way through. What is it, 50, 60? And then going, what do you mean she's dead? There's no more? I didn't know that. It's like I would have parsed it out a little bit better. Um, and years ago, I was in well, it wouldn't be that many years ago, but I was in a seminar with somebody who said, tell me your 5 favorite movies. And I wrote Chinatown, Body Heat, North by Northwest, those
Ooh,
kind of movies. And she said, oh, and that's
noir.
what you write? And I
Uh,
said, no. And she said, why not? And I remember that stuck with me thinking, yeah, why isn't that what I'm writing? So my second book is that. So I guess I would say I'm influenced by those kind of things. The movies and the books where you can't quite tell what's going on and they surprise you.
exactly. So, do you have any advice that you might, that if somebody was wanting to write their first book and here they are in midlife and they might be feeling like it's too late, that the ship has sailed or whatever.
Never too late.
Cool. What kind of advice? Like, where would you suggest that somebody start um, to get started in writing?
Well, I think I would suggest they find a writing community. And that means other people that are writers that can help you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and oftentimes that's genre related. Like if they're a romance writer, they might join the Romance Writers Association, women's fiction,
Mm-hmm.
science fiction, mystery writers of America, um, and then join an association where you might go to a conference or might take a class or join a round table where you can read your things out loud. I think it's nice to get feedback from other writers, and then also you give them feedback, and that teaches you a lot too,
Mm-hmm.
because when you read like an editor, you're reading somebody else's work, that can teach you about your own work. Why is this sluggish pacing kind of things, or you've said that a couple of times, redundancy kinds of things. So
Mm-hmm.
just kind of get immersed in the writing community. It I did that a little bit with the podcast, but I'm also a member of Rocky Mountain, as I mentioned, which is in Colorado, and I'm in Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
So I belong to that. I belong to Chicago Writers Association, which is 90 minutes from my house. But, I belong to a lot of associations like that. And you just get into everyone around you is talking writing. And then you feel like you are a writer too.
Yeah, they
And all
say
you
you're
have to
the
do
what
is,
the average of the what are the 5 people you hang out with the most. So if you start hanging putting yourself in that community of people
yes.
thinking about what they're writing all the time, I could see where that definitely
And
could help.
sometimes you read stuff of other people's and you think, I can write as well as that.
Yeah.
I, I'm not that bad. Or somebody says, I enjoyed this, and it gives you confidence.
Yeah.
Or you meet somebody that you feel like is on the same page and you become critique partners and you trade back and forth pages. So that would be the single piece of advice I would have would be surround yourself with writers.
Yeah.
And now you can do that on Zoom much
Yeah.
more easily than you used to be able to when it was more face to face.
Yeah. Wow. So cool. I'm going to ask you one last question. And I know it's gone so fast and I'm having so much fun. I hate to end it even. But I'm going to ask you a question that I heard you ask on your podcast.
Okay.
So, what is something that's quirky about you that people don't know that's not in your bio?
That is my last question on my podcast. And I've been thinking about this because I'm going to be on my own podcast. Somebody else is going to interview me. Um, I have this strange habit, and I've had it, I think, since I was in college. is that sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes my fingers are moving as though I'm typing what is being said or what I'm reading or what's being said on the TV or what my husband is saying to me. I'm just here, you can't see it, but I'm typing it with my fingers. My fingers are moving. And I can remember being on dates when somebody was holding my hand and I was doing that, and he would say, "What are you typing? Why are your fingers moving?" And I would say, "I'm typing out that license plate of the car in front of us." I don't know. Maybe like I was practicing typing or something.
Wow.
I don't know. But I still do it. Not as much as I used to in college. But that's very
fascinating. Quirky. Yes, that is quirky. And so, like, it's almost like that writer was in you the whole time, just waiting to get out, right? Oh my goodness. That's fabulous. I love that answer.
See, I'm typing answer right now.
Oh my goodness. Answer. Are you? I don't know the keyboard that well. I have to be literally in front and go, oh, okay. I don't hunt and peck. I can actually type, but I don't know it that well. That's hilarious. Oh my goodness.
I know. It's weird.
So your book is called Truth and Other Lies.
Right.
It's really great. I totally enjoyed reading it.
Good.
And, don't want to give anything away because I do feel like there's a little bit of the suspense novel in it,
A little bit. Yeah. There is a mystery.
Yeah.
And there is some clues to be followed. And, and then there's a flip a couple of times at the end.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the major rewrites I did when it was kind of all done, and my first publishing house, which is not my publishing house now, but they had bought it and they were going to publish it. They said, but you have to change the ending because you have the bad guy win and that won't work. And I thought, I know I need to have the bad guy lose, but I can't figure out how to do it. And they said, well, you're going to have to figure out how to do it.
Wow.
And so I did, but it was hard because I just followed the way I thought it would go, and I couldn't figure out how to flip it. But I finally did, so I flipped it.
Wow. And well done. Kudos to you. Congratulations. You and I are sitting here talking on February 3rd, and your episode's not going to come out until May. So your book, by this point in time, by the time folks hear this, will be out in the world, and they'll be able to go find it. And then what would be the best way for them to find you and learn more about you?
Well, they could go to my website, which is nothing more than Maggie Smith Writer, WRITER.com.
Okay.
And I'm probably most active on Instagram, and there I am, Maggie Smith Writes, WRITES.
Great. Fantastic.
So those would be the two places.
All right. And I'll have that in the show notes for everybody. Thank you so much for sitting down with me today. Oh, thank you. I'm glad.
I feel like I made a new friend.
Me too. Thank you. Well, there you have it. Wow. So to go from not feeling like a creative person or creative type to going on a retreat just because she needed a little outlet and was curious, to publishing a darn novel and starting a podcast. I mean, I just love I love Maggie's journey. I think it's amazing. Yeah. So I don't really have much else to say about that other than I think it's amazing, and I think this is possible for anyone. You may not have the money to go on a retreat and invest in that sort of an experience, but that does not at all mean that you can't explore your creative side through some other means, through a local class. There's so many avenues that are open to us. There's free YouTube videos. Seriously, I have learned so much watching free YouTube tutorials. I don't play the ukulele regularly, but I did start to learn the ukulele by watching a free YouTube tutorial. I'm going to get back to that, I think, because it was fun. I have learned how to do certain Photoshop tricks using free YouTube tutorials. So I'm just saying that it is possible. You can do anything you set your mind to. And I encourage you to have a little fun figuring out what that could be and challenge yourself. Give yourself a little challenge to try something new this week. Sit with a cup of coffee or tea, pull out your journal, and start writing. If I could do anything, what would it be? Ask yourself that question. If I had no limitations for time and money, and I could explore doing something new, what would that be? And then see if there's some baby step that you could take in that direction. Yeah, that's my challenge to you this week and to myself. What the heck? So before I go, I want to say that you can find more information about Maggie Smith at the show notes, which is at latebloomerliving.com/podcast. Look for episode 98. Oh my goodness, we're coming up on episode 100. Besides that, it has now been a week since the summit started, the Midlife Uprising Summit. It was beyond my wildest expectations. The speakers did such an incredible job, and I get so much great feedback from people who participated. I'm just gobsmacked. You can still get a hold of the Power Pack, the Midlife Power Pack, which is an all-access pass upgrade. You just go to midlifeuprising.com/Power Pack, all one word. It gives you access to all of the presentations for a full year. And there are speaker bonuses that are going to be available up until June 18th. You have until then to take advantage of speaker bonuses, which are freebies and discounts off offers and memberships and coaching programs and all kinds of stuff. I mean, the value of this is so beyond $97. It is ridiculous. It is not even funny. You know, I don't sell a lot here, and I just want to tell you, I am proud of it and think it's so worth the money, and you deserve to invest in yourself. So if you have any desire to do that, I encourage you to go for it. The deadline's midnight tonight. This is Wednesday, May 18th. All right? In the meantime, have a fantastic week. Stay safe and well. Talk soon.